Hello, my name is Dan Humberg. I represent HarvestFires.com. This is an instructional video. It's intended to help anyone who is installing the tin set as a part of a Firestop kit on a combine harvester. In this case, the model number, or the model that the tin is designed for, is a John Deere model 9760. Probably same as the 9660, and also the 50 series, the 9650, and maybe the 9750 if there is one. Anyway, they all use this same engine, and so this will fit several different models. I know I've put it on a 9760, and I know I've put it on a 9650 before. Now there is variation among those models, so some aspects of it may not fit perfectly when you get your kit, and you could end up having to modify it slightly if that's the case. But the intent is that this would fit those models. What we're looking at is the 3D CAD model, the assembly diagram of the tin pieces that box in the exhaust manifold, the turbocharger, and in this case the muffler as well of the engine from those combines. If we look from the top, this would be the top view, the head of the engine would be right up above here, and then the exhaust manifold would be located right at this level, and then the exhaust turbine from the turbocharger would be right inside here, and the muffler would actually be located right here inside this large box. This odd-shaped opening right down in here that you can see where my cursor is where the turbocharger bearing is that separates the turbocharger exhaust turbine from the compressor turbine. So the compressor turbine is going to be out in the open here, and there's going to be the air lines that serve it right here in the way. They don't show obviously in this diagram, but they're there when you're doing the install. On the back side, I'm upside down now, but on the back side we can roll it around here. Is the opening where the air, our clean filtered air, is going to enter the system to keep any dust from reaching the components that would be hot enough to ignite that dust. You can see the opening here where the exhaust manifold is going to extend into. In actuality, the exhaust manifold is well, it's up here and down into this area, but we can't get the exhaust manifold without also getting the intake manifold. They kind of alternate left or one and the other in between the ports on that side of the engine. So our exhaust manifold may actually be inside up here, but we've got intake manifold down here as well, and so we have to wrap around that. It's just impossible to get one without getting the other one, and so the system wraps around that and encloses the intake manifold as well. This opening on this end of the box with those fingers is where the air is coming back, I believe, from the probably the intercooler, and is entering the intake manifold along here, or entering here and moving along the intake manifold inside there. And so this is kind of a rubber fitting that joins the intake manifold to the piping that gets to the intercooler, and so we have to fit around that circular, cylindrical, odd-shaped rubber fitting. That's what one of the challenges in this particular kit is. Okay, let's step through the individual pieces. I'm going to go through them in the order that I would do the assembly in, tell you some of the peculiarities, but then you can see how what the pieces look like. Whenever I put the cursor on one of these pieces, it shows the outline of it, the perimeter of it, and so you can see the bends, the tabs, and things like that from the extent of it, even though it's involved in the assembly. So this first piece, this gray piece, goes from the head, the engine head, which is actually at the level of these tabs, and there's a little platform there, and then there's a raised part of the head out here a little bit. So this will fit into that kind of gap there. And we have to figure out some method of holding this down, and that's one of the things. There's variation among the different combines over the life that they made them. Sometimes I end up making a little bracket tab to hold these tabs down. In other cases, there's a bolt there that I could loosen and fit these pieces underneath a part of it, or cut it so that it would fit underneath that bolt head and bolt it down with that. But you'll have to figure out some method of locking this down, because there are differences between different age machines and these models. But this first piece is it has a tab here, and then bends up and over and then down to go around the exhaust manifold. There's an end flap here that will, when necessary, bend down around the end. Has a couple of holes here to tie it to the underlying piece. So that's the first piece, and when in the assembly process, it just slips down. It just slides down over the top of the exhaust manifold and goes in behind the air pipe that's leaving air, bringing air to the compressor turbine here. So you can slide that in place, and you can reach back and push this tab down on the back side most of the way. Not all of the way, because it's going to go down over. You're going to have to finish bending it down later. So that's the first piece. The second piece is this blue piece, and when I point to it, you can see that there's a tab back here that runs up underneath the first piece. And so when we put these together, we might have to lift the first piece up, slide this one in, and then slide it back down over the top of this. And then it takes a little bit to do this, but you need to fuss around with them until you can get the screw holes to line up. There's a pilot hole here, and then a back pilot hole for the screws. If you can get one of these to line up so that you can shoot a screw through there, and you need a long driver bit because you're reaching underneath a air pipe here to do that. Once you get one screw in there, then it pulls the next ones into alignment, and you can shoot the rest of these screws, or most of them, in. In this one, I'd put 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe you can get to that fifth one. This one back here you may not be able to reach. It's actually behind where that airline exits here or enters back here, and it's just really tough to reach. But those two can be fixed together with those screws. Don't do the inner ones here. Those are needed later. So that one. Now, having said that, it's easy to see about attaching those two together. One of the biggest challenges with this kit is the bottom of this piece. It's going to fit in a slot back here. There's kind of a gap between the head and the block where this is going to slip in place here, and hopefully I've got it cut so that it will do that. Once in a while I've had issues with it, maybe bumping into something and back in here along this edge. And you may need to clear that slot out with a thin piece of something, like a piece of this tin or a screwdriver or something thin like that, some kind of a thin blade like thing, because it can plug with dirt over time in there and make it hard to get things in. The other thing is that there are several features we have to fit around here. It's the starting fluid port here. There's an ether port, I guess, or an ether starting fluid line that runs underneath here. A little tiny line goes into a brass fitting here. I usually end up disconnecting that, threading the brass fitting out so that I can slide this in and fit this around that fitting, and then put the fit it around the hole, and then put the fitting back up in there and connect the pipe back, or the little tube back on. There's a sensor port, probably a pressure sensor or temperature sensor in the intake manifold that comes in here. I'm not sure if it's affiliated with this slot or if it's with this hole, and hopefully I've got those in the right place, but they've moved those over the life of these machines, so that these holes may or may not line up with those when you get that. But the intent is that you'd be able to slide this in and fit it around those pieces, those fitting, whether they're sensors or whatever. Also, there's a slit here because there's kind of a bump in the block here, and we may need to fit this over that bump a little bit in order to get it back in there. Anyway, we've designed that to be able to make it a little bit more flexible. This cut whether it's to this hole or whether it's back in here to fit around that sensor, you may need to extend it if they've moved that sensor. In any case, you'll need to test fit this several times to see if you can get it back in there and around those different components. I think on the sensor, I may have been able to pop that sensor off. It's got a snap-on fitting. Pull it off and then fit this in and then put the sensor back in too. That's possible. I just don't recall right now. It's been a while since I did one of these. But you need to test fit this one, and you'll need to do it several times probably to make sure you can get it back in there, get it, and when it'll kind of pop in place when you get it around everything and sit in there back in on top of it in this slot. We don't really lock the bottom of it onto anything. We've just got stuff that goes through it and it kind of sits on that ledge back in there, but it can't really go anywhere once it's in that position anyway. And once you do have it so that it fits around things, then it's time to go in and put these screws in and lock it to the first piece like I said. Once you have that one in and these screws in place and you have it fit around here, you can put the ether line back on, make sure that sensor is reconnected, and then we can worry about the next piece. On some of the kits, probably in the 9760s, I designed this little bracket to fit around here to come out farther, because there was a clamp on this rubber hose that left here or that enters here with the air returning from the intercooler, that it made very difficult to fit closely around. So this piece can screw onto the outside here and fit more closely up against that rubber piece. It has a tab that will bend around the end here. You see it comes down like this. You can bend this around and it'll fit more tightly underneath that rubber fitting, and there's 2 screw holes here, and it will screw through this end piece from the previous one and lock to that. About the same time you're doing that, you can push this end tab down tightly over the bottom piece, and you can reach back and get 1 or 2 screws to tie those two together. And now you kind of got a box on the end here that should tighten this up, and then and when we do that, you may need to bend these fingers when you put this, this piece that was so challenging underneath here. It's also challenging a little bit, not so much, but on this end these slits are cut so that you have fingers here that will bend up and around that rubber cylindrical rubber hole tube that brings the air back from the intercooler. So you can kind of press fit them around it so that they fit as close as possible to that rubber fitting and don't allow a lot of places for dust to leak in around this to get in near the exhaust manifold. So you can bend those up, and then that circular tube should be able to fit around and down in here. Wrap this around and screw it on, bring that down, screw it on, and then at that point we should be fairly close fitting around that rubber entry fitting there. We can also fill in with some of that duct aluminum foil duct tape that I ship with the kit, so you can tighten this up if there are gaps around it. We really do not want exposed gaps around here because we're facing the radiator fan here, and it can try to blow dust into this enclosure, and we want to exclude it here. We will let air exit elsewhere in the kit, but not on that end. We want to try and keep that as tight as possible. So those are the first few pieces. The next piece, the next piece is this one. Hard to see it from any other angle, but that piece will slide in here and screw down to these others, and it fits near the front end of that turbocharger bearing journal area. You could have to cut that a little. If it doesn't fit in there, you may need to trim around here around this corner of it so that it has clearance around that bearing area. So test fit that one once or twice. When you get it so that it fits in here, you can screw it down here and screw it into this piece here forward. The next piece to fit is the back part of that. It slides in from the back. Again, you could need to trim it here, potentially underneath here a little bit, so that it'll fit around that bearing journal, go underneath it. When you get it fit correctly, it'll slide in inside the other one. You can see it from the bottom here maybe as well. Well, not so much. There it is. it'll slide in there, and I've got 6 holes where they would all line up if you could get them lined up. You do not need 6 screws to hold that together. 2 is more than enough. It's just that I didn't know where we'd be able to reach. It's a really tight space in there behind the turbocharger. I'm going to look at this from the other end here. If we look at it from the inside, you can see how this overlaps, and you have to reach behind here with a long screwdriver to get a screw to go in 1 or 2 of these holes. If you get a couple of them, fine, it'll hold together. 3 is more than enough. So we can see it here again. Okay, when we have that in place and it clears the bearing area here, then we're ready to put the top half of this on. The top half is this bigger piece. It'll come down over the top of that bearing area. Now, in most of the ones I've done, I have to trim this more, enlarge it a little bit, and you can put it in place, see where if it's bumping into this bearing area, just mark it with a Sharpie, take it out and trim a little bit, fit it a couple times until you got just a little bit of clearance around that bearing here. And when it clears the bearing and slides down in so that these holes line up, you're good to go. And you can put screws through from the, let's see, these going to go through from the inside. Yes, they're going to go through from right to left, it looks like. It looks like to me like they're going to go, let's see. Looks to me like they're going to go right to left from the inside to the outside, and that's probably easy to do at this point yet because we don't have this, nothing else is on here. These big pieces are not in place yet, so you can put screws through from the right to the left to get that put together. In actuality, you've got the turbocharger compressor turbine right here, and it may interfere with being able to get in here to put screws through from the left to the right, so we put them from the right to the left. Up here in the front, same thing probably. Those look, I'm not sure whether they go right to left or left to right, but in any case you've got plenty of space here to do that because you don't have a lot of other stuff in the way yet. Okay, once we have that piece in place, that's this piece up here, now we've got this great big piece. Let's get it back into center field of view here. This whole thing is a giant folded piece, all the way from down here up to here. Looking at it from the end, it's got a tab on the top, and it goes down, under, down, and under. It has some cuts in the bottom here, some arced cuts to try to fit around bumps in the block, but then again it should sit in that kind of a slot between the head and the block where it can kind of rest there. And that one isn't generally too hard to get in place, but you'll have to slip it in here. There are a couple things I had to disconnect here. As I recall, I had that line that serves the starting fluid thing over on the left maybe in the way, and you may need to suspend that with something else because I'm not sure that we can, that ran through this area. Anyway, that you may encounter that and have to work around that. But this will drop down here, slide in place. Once you do get it in place, you can attach it with screws under here. It should slip inside or up above the blue piece. Screw from underneath to put it together. And then we've got screws from underneath here that you can shoot upward, and screws that you can put through here, all the way up this row. And now you've got that piece hung in place. When you get that one in place, now we've got the end pieces to worry about. Actually, at this point, I'd probably do this giant red piece. It goes from the same head location, the end block head over here, goes up and then over, and it will fit underneath this tab on the back piece here. Slide underneath there, and you can screw it together there, around here, down the front here. And then we may need to figure out some way to pin it down onto the block. And again, that is somewhat specific to the vintage of your machine in terms of what's here and available to tie it down. Then we have 2 pieces left. This piece, the purple one here, has tabs almost all the way around. And so that one will slip inside the rest of this box. You have to open it up because it's got to go around the exhaust pipe as it leaves your muffler, so you'll have to bend it open where this cut is here to fit it around that pipe, and then bend it shut again, and then screw it in place through the tabs. And then the last one is this piece here. It has tabs down here, and up here, and it's got to cut into a hole that goes around I think it's the turbocharger oil line again. But anyway, there's a tube that runs through here, and so you have to split this open, go around that tube, make sure you don't have contact with that tube such that it will abrade it, and then slip these flanges. In this case, they go behind the red piece, over the top of the purple piece, looks like under the bottom piece here. Slide in there, and you can put screws through this end down here and up here. Can be a little dicey here. It's a tight space because you're up against some frame members here where this exhaust pipe enters, but you can get enough screws in here to hold this all together. Once you've done that, you've got the tin enclosure put together on the system for the Firestop system. I think on most of the enclosures I've done, I made a little strap to hang this because this box isn't really well supported on here. There is a support member up above here, and you can take a little piece of tin and use one of these screws and hold it down and suspend it up from that, so it kind of hangs from the support rail that runs up above this end of the box. After that, I'd come with the tin foil tape, make sure I've got this end taped up tight around the tube that has to exit there. Any other spaces that you want to tighten up where you think you've got too large of gaps. Down here is where the oil line enters. Let's see, is that that's where the turbocharger, I think it's where the drain line exits here. And again, we have to make sure we've got clearance around that, so make sure you don't have any contact around there. If necessary, you need to open that up around that oil return line when it exits there, so we don't abrade that and cut through that line. So that's the tin set for a Firestop kit, in this case for the 9760, 9660, 9650 combines from John Deere. If you have any questions about it, you can certainly post them to me at harvestfires@outlook.com, or you can go to the bottom of the Harvest Fires website, and there's a contact form there that you could send a comment or question to me. There may also be a telephone number there if you really need help quickly. Anyway, that's the tin set. It shows the individual pieces. You might want to use this as a reference before you follow the tin bending video that shows how to bend and assemble the tin on the bench for this combine. Good luck with your kit. As I tell everybody anytime with regard to these kits, this will greatly reduce the number of smolders that you have on the combine if you're harvesting flowers, safflower, sunflower, canola, even soybeans. Yeah, I can't guarantee that you'll never have a fire on the combine. You can still have a fire that comes from a failing alternator, from a electrical short, from a hot bearing, or from some other source of heat or spark on the combine. But this will generally, people say that this stops the chronic smolders that they have on the combine with those volatile crops. So have a safe harvest. Good luck with your installation.